We think that there's a pretty interesting opportunity here for another team, to basically pick this up and actually try to build something on top of HIP-3 with USD redenomination. I think it's a pretty interesting revenue opportunity because HIP-3 basically shares 50% of the fees that come through from those markets with the deployer. And so if you run basic maths, even 25% of Hyperliquid flows at a 50% take, if people just want to use what we view as a superior form of collateral versus USDC, it's north of 110, 120 mil of cost-free revenue.
All right, we're live, GM guys. Today is July 31st, 2025, 5 p.m. Hong Kong time. Nothing here is financial advice. We'll skip the pleasantries. Guy, welcome.
Thanks for having me, man.
Yeah, well, I should say welcome back. We were just talking before this. It's a little more exciting. I think things are happening. The first thing, just housekeeping. Why don't you give us some update on numbers that you have? I have some numbers in front of me, which is 7 billion USDE, 10 to 12% take rate, which is 700 million plus in revenue, which translates to about 100 and 150 million dollars of revenue dollars for Ethena protocol annualized. But those are probably stale because it's a couple days ago. You're ramping very quickly. Why don't you just give us the updated numbers today?
Yeah, for sure. So right now, sitting at around 8.5 bill of supply for USDE. We've added just over 3 billion in the last 14 days. So this is actually the quickest growth period we've ever been through, and rates aren't even above the 10 to 12% range. I think this is pretty consistent with a theme that we discussed on the last call, which I think is the cost of capital for what people require to come into Ethena has just very drastically dropped through time. And my sense is that a few hundred basis points pick up to treasuries is actually all people need now. And I think the perceived risk of what we're doing has drastically changed, especially since the Bybit incident. I think it was a pretty pivotal moment for us where people just don't view it in the same way that they did a year ago. It's a pretty important point for us on both the retention side, when you go through those periods of, a lull in funding rates like we've seen, where I was pretty pleasantly surprised by, I think, the retention of USD supply through those periods of time. And what you're saying now is, the rate market isn't even sort of near froth levels at the moment, and we're growing faster than we ever have. It's sort of 200 to 250 mil a day of supply that's coming through. With a bunch of the initiatives that we sort of discussed in the last time not even being live yet. So I think we'd sort of ballpark spoken about a sort of target for 12 bill of supply this year. I think if rates kind of stay broadly where they are now, not even assuming that they move from here, I think that that's probably a conservative estimate. I think we'll be close to 10 bill by the end of next week, basically.
Oh, wow.
And yeah.
What? I guess we did talk about this, which is at that point, I think that the supply was 5 billion, and then you have a TVL 5 billion, you have a plan towards 12. I think you have a bridge in my mind of how you want to get there. Why don't you walk us through the bridge and tell us what beat or undershot expectation today?
Yeah, sure. So I think in that bridge, we sort of just had roughly 2 bill coming from Aave Morpho leverage, which is a fair bit of the growth that you've just seen in the last week, I think is coming via Aave. So I think that that's broadly consistent with what we're describing there. Another one was with Sky, where I think I'd earmarked something around $1 billion, which is exactly the number that Sky has put into Ethena now. I think that this represents considerable upside from where we are now, though, because Sky is growing quite a bit as well. It's sitting at roughly 7.5 bill of supply right now. They're relatively underweight USDE versus other assets. And a very key part of what's changed now with Sky is that it's almost acting like an investment bank where it lends out capital to these stars, which then basically have a much broader scope to be able to just go and beat 480 basis points is basically the threshold that Sky sort of gives to each of these stars. And what that means is that these stars now are much more profit maximizing than they were before, where I'd sort of describe it as a finger in the air exercise before in terms of what was the allocation to Ethena. And so Spark now is literally incentivized to just have as much as it possibly can within Ethena. The average rate on Spark is just under 600 basis points, where Ethena is at roughly 12% right now. And they're basically just working through on the risk side now to get green light and clearance to sort of increase the exposure that they have. So in a falling interest rate environment, I think that becomes more acute. And we're sitting at just over 10% of the supply of DAI is backed with USDE. I think in a falling interest rate environment, that number should be closer to 30 to 50% going forward. So I think that that's actually a huge area for growth once we work through these risk pieces with Sky and Spark.
Upside to 1 billion.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, I think there's, assuming Sky doesn't even grow at all, I think there's sort of $2, $3, $4 billion left of basically just rotating from BidClub into Ethena. Outside of that, I think we had Telegram. That has considerably undershot my expectations, and I think I'm pretty disappointed with where that's landed at the moment. It was supposed to be a phased rollout of the entire product. It's sitting at roughly 160 mil now on TON, which is actually the second largest non-ETH L1 chain exposure for USD supply. A big piece of this is that it was a very phased rollout, and there was a lot of restrictions around users' ability to sort of access the product. So it had a cap of like $10,000 per user. You had to buy and stake TON in order to participate in sort of the initial rollout. They didn't have access within the US, which is just come out last week, and then DeFi hadn't launched at all, which is what we pushed out yesterday. So I had slightly higher expectations, I'd say, in terms of where we'd be sitting there right now. We just had a call with the team today to sort of like map out how we 10x the number that's sitting on there at the moment. So that one I think has just been a bit more of a slow cook versus where we've been on ETH, but it's still something that we're sort of pushing pretty hard, and I think there's a lot of different levers that we can sort of pull, particularly when you think about how you can actually bring Telegram into the equation rather than just having it as like a TON native experience. But yeah, I'd say that one has undershot my expectations and is somewhat disappointing to me so far. And then a few of them, have just taken a bit more time to come out, which, haven't been released and obviously represent upside from here. So a few of the exchanges, you've got Ethereal has been in testnet now for over 6 weeks with pretty positive feedback from users who have engaged there. I think that's obviously got some growth in it when mainnet launches basically mid-August. So there's sort of like 2 weeks now until mainnet's live for Ethereal. And then there's another project which I think we can jump into towards maybe the end of this discussion, but I think what's going on with Hyperliquid on HIP-3 I think is a very interesting opportunity. Yeah.
For sure, we could do that. So it sounds like you're actually quite on track to meet or even beat the target ahead of time. Like it's kind of 12 billion by year end, but you should hit it in like 2 months if things go well.
Yeah, it's very difficult with Ethena, right? Because sometimes I get a forecast and then the rates collapse.
Fair enough.
It did, and then sometimes it just grows a lot quicker than you think. But I think on the assumption that the market environment is sort of where it is right now, I'd be pretty disappointed if we weren't north of like 15 bill at the end of the year. Yeah.
And with, let's say if we do get to 15, I mean, you kind of talked about a 10 to 20% take rate. You had 15% in 2024 on the revenue. Assuming the funding rates remain the way they are, which is like 10 to 20% for Bitcoin and ETH, what's that revenue for us looking like by the end of the year if you hit 15 billion?
Yeah,
like to the Ethena protocol. Yeah. On a gross and on a net basis. Yeah.
Yeah. Gross revenue basis is obviously broadly between 1.5 to $2 billion of like gross interest income, and then if you're going to assume something between a 5 to 20% take rate on that, you're obviously looking at anywhere between 50 to 400 mil of like net income that could potentially be coming back. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you feel like it should? Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I was going to say,
No. Sorry. Do you feel like it should hit kind of in that 15 to 20% type take rate ballpark, or is there any risk that it should fall meaningfully below?
I think there's a phased approach here, which is something that we spoke through last time when you were sort of asking me how I thought about the fee switch. It's been something where I've had a different view to the rest of the market, which is my intention with this is to grow this product into like 30 to $50 billion over the next 5 years, and I think that's what the market opportunity is that lies ahead of us. I've always erred on the side of like not capturing value too early relative to what I think is like the real outcome here, which is kind of like a bigger business than Circle. And so the reason I'm giving that context is because I think trying to capture that full sort of 15, 20, 25% take rate at this point in time, and before we're sort of like saturated in terms of our growth expectations and like market dominance, I don't think is the right move. But I think the plan that we have on our side, which is something that we'll sort of vocalize and sort of share with governance when the time is right, is sort of a phased approach where I think you'd start at something like 5-ish% of your take rate that's coming through. You make it very clear to people that you're saying at 15 to 20 bill, I'm making up numbers here by the way, but at 15 to 20 bill of supply, we think like a 5% take rate is appropriate because we want to get to 30 to 40. And once we're at 30 to 40, we think that this take rate is appropriate, and sort of lay out how we think about those milestones. But yeah, it's something that I've disagreed with the market, but equally I also need to listen to the market because the market I think is over rewarding people now for demonstrating that they care about the token. And so any amount of fees that go back to the token sort of get a green light from the market, I think, in terms of demonstrating to people that you actually care about the token going up. So that's something that I've had to reconsider myself, which is even though I disagree that like a huge take rate now makes sense, I want to try meet something in the middle that does sort of show that I'm listening to people's concerns.
Yeah. And let's say if you are making sort of 100, 150, 200 of revenue for Ethena protocol by the end of the year, remind us again, what's your kind of cash cost operating expense per annum, and then sort of what's your treasury today?
Yeah, so the quarterly OPEX for employees and that kind of stuff is like sub 1.7 mil on a quarterly basis. So the running cost for Ethena is like less than 10 mil a year when you include everything. And we've got more than enough sort of cash just sitting in the bank to cover that for the holding period of your listeners.
Yeah. Okay. Makes sense. Yeah, you meant it in the nicest way possible. We never sell anything.
But yeah, there's zero need to capture any of the sort of potential net revenue that I described that to fund any OPEX or anything like that. Yeah.
I think some of the biggest developments that I'm observing are number one, the Stablecoin X that you are kind of helping launch in the market, and then secondly is the Genius and Clarity Act that have already passed or come into market. Let's start with Stablecoin X. I guess let's start with this, which is what people know today about it is that there will be a $260 million cash component, which translates to about kind of 6 weeks of bids with $5 million a day, and it's going to hold about 100 million of contributed Ethena basically forever, some from foundation, some from contribution. That's what people know today. I guess, what are some of the most important things you think people don't know about with this vehicle?
Yeah, so maybe it's just like a disclaimer. I'm obviously, this is a separate team who's running the vehicle. I'm obviously, running Ethena on the lab side, but like a lot of these thoughts are like my own rather than like the management team and stuff that's involved with Stablecoin X. I think what we've sort of publicized was trying to demonstrate to the point that I was making earlier that we do care about the token going up a lot. And I think the deal structure here looked very different to what you're seeing, where a lot of these vehicles are just kind of extra liquidity for in-kind holders to be selling on to equity participants. We made a very intentional effort here, which we wanted to show people that cash bids would be hitting the market at a very substantial size relative to our float. So if you just compare the amount of cash that's coming in relative to the circulating market cap on the announcement, it's obviously changed now. It was just over 8% of the float was going to be absorbed in this vehicle. And to me, a key cause here is something that you touched on there, which is the Ethena Foundation has a veto right on sales for the token within the vehicle. So for us, I thought it was a very good mechanism to sort of address some of the flows issues that we've had with unlocks, which obviously most of the people listening to this call are sort of aware of the difficulties that we sort of faced in the last few months until now. And I think it just sort of flips the flows where there's a very obvious mismatch in terms of demand versus supply in the sort of like interim period as this comes through. And so, changing people's perception there was a very important piece for us, which was there is more buying than selling occurring in the next few weeks. I think, the piece that maybe we sort of haven't spoken about, and again, this is up to the team who's sort of deciding this, but I'm just sort of sharing what I would support myself, like on the lab side, is we obviously plan to do a lot more than what came out there originally, and there's like a question of what happens after 6 weeks, and there is an intention, obviously, to, whether it's in the public market or through additional private raises, continue sort of the flywheel that I think we've sort of started going now. I think in an end state, I think there's actually a really interesting opportunity here to get almost close to 30% of the circulating float into things that look like this. And I think the sort of flow dynamics for us there are particularly attractive just because tokens kind of go in one direction and hopefully don't come out on the other side. So that's kind of the what I'd be supportive of on that side. Yeah.
And you talked about this on Twitter. Obviously, you can't speak on behalf of the team because they will be the ones who are issuing shares or buying back shares. But from talking to them, should we expect sort of aggressive issuance down to 1 times, market price to NAV, or like how do they think about the sort of price to NAV dynamics in terms of issuance and buyback?
Yeah, I'm not sure if I'd describe it as aggressive, and this is not something that I've had experience doing myself, but I think one thing of the deal dynamics here that looks slightly different is that the entry MNAV is actually below 1x for the investors that came in because of the fact that there were locked tokens in the vehicle, which is obviously public. And for that reason, yeah, people are going to be up on paper even at 1.1x and sort of potentially, taking profit there as well. But yeah, I think generally when it's accretive to do so, i.e. above kind of 0.8x NAV, you're kind of in the money when it comes to like issuing new shares and sort of continuing the buying. So I expect that would be pretty consistent with other vehicles that you've seen in the market in terms of their intentions there. But yeah, the idea is that you can sort of use the public equity markets once it is sort of trading to accretively acquire from there. Yeah.
And I guess it will kind of only be accretive to everybody if it's issued above 1 times NAV. I mean, they can buy it at 0.8, but it would make sense for them to sort of only issue above 1. And that's kind of the, okay. I think the one of the more exciting part for me about the story is that the public market really only had Circle for a while for liquid, stablecoin, quote unquote exposure. This will be kind of a second one, at least in my mind. I guess then the question translates to, it would seem like it will be a pretty exciting narrative for institutions as well. Are you, along with them, doing any kind of DEX banker roadshows to really appeal to the Vikings and Tigers of the world in terms of this vehicle?
Yes, absolutely. Spoke to a bunch of those kind of guys who had a lot of interest actually in the round that we just got done, but there was one dynamic which TradFi couldn't really stomach, which was most of these deals have you fund on closing rather than on signing when there's like a gap between the announcement and actual like trading of the shares. The type of names that you've just described there are not in the business of taking like 3 months of ENA market risk, and so they had very strict requirements around we're interested, but it's like at closing rather than like doing the deal, which a lot of crypto native capital basically funded the announcement that we had last week. So yeah, there's a huge amount of interest. I think you either made a lot of money on Circle and want to run it back, or missed it entirely and see this as a very clear opportunity. And I think the pitch is pretty simple here, which is the entry for people getting in here on like a look-through basis to Ethena was like sub $4 billion FDV. Circle was at like 50 to 60, and on the numbers that I was just describing to you there, in terms of supply growth and revenue, there's a very real scenario in which you're actually generating more cash than Circle 12 months forward from where we are now. So I don't think you get that kind of growth story at the size that we are. We grew sort of like 60% month on month in terms of supply. And so that to me feels like a pretty big mismatch in terms of where Circle's priced in the public markets and where private capital sort of got into the vehicle. And so yeah, I think this is actually the most exciting piece of it to me. It was less around like premium NAV premium arbitrage type stuff. It was actually just like there is clearly an excess demand for this theme in TradFi and no way for people to express it. Hence, Circle trades to 300 times earnings, and being able to give someone a growth story with like the first legitimate competitor to be able to get to that size and revenue and earnings generation capacity, I think is a pretty easy story to sell to that market. Yeah.
Should we? I mean, obviously it's under wraps until it comes out, but should we expect any kind of like sell side initiations and non-deal roadshows? I don't know if there's incentives for share issuance there for banks to take you around and do the roadshow, or like with a research report coming out.
Yeah, I think again, I think a lot of the responsibility for that is going to sit with the management team, but they're going to be pushing down all of these avenues where I would expect to, at least when it sort of gets closer to the time where shares will be trading, that kind of stuff. But yeah, that would be my base case expectation that they're doing that. Yeah.
And obviously you can't speak on behalf of the team, but when it comes to, let's say they raise more money down the road, roughly speaking, from them telling you, what will be the rough split of direct buying in the market through a TWAP versus buying from foundation versus buying in kind from other VCs?
Yeah, I think it's we're trying as much as possible to not allow VCs to just do OTCs, because I think the market impact of telling people that you're buying is much more than the dollars that are buying, if that makes sense. Like, even looking at the Ethena volumes, it was trading like 1.5 bill to 2 bill a day relative to 5 mil of buying that's coming from us, and it had a very material compounding effect, I think, with other people sort of coming in rather than just the buying itself. And so I think psychologically it's a very important thing for us to do, which is every single dollar that is raised through this mechanism is going to be hitting the market either via the vehicle or via the foundation supporting that. So I think the market has reacted quite negatively when a few of the headlines have come out this week where it says cash has been raised, but we just sort of OTC'd it with a few people or the foundation. It just isn't the right story to be showing people. You want to show people that you're in the market and deploying alongside them.
So if there's likely no VCs, foundation only if needed, and if so in small pieces anyways, great majority in public TWAP, effectively.
Yeah, correct. I'd assume every single dollar that's raised through this vehicle or others or whatever mechanism, it is solely for the use of buying on the open market in the same way that we have done now. Yeah.
Makes sense. One thing that's exciting to me, not that you need it, but let's say you start hitting that $12 to $15 billion TVL targets. I have always thought that having a public vehicle like this could be serving as a pretty exciting, whether it's a fintech player, whether it's like an asset manager that just goes out there and start raising SPVs for the yield that you offer. Do you feel like the ListCo could be operating a vehicle like this that juices TVL for USDE itself?
Yeah, 100%. I think this whole process opened up my eyes. We've obviously got the iUSDE product that we described, but that's in more of a private format to kind of hit the same market that you're describing here. But one idea that we're playing with now is you could technically sort of sell PT USDE into a vehicle like this, right? Because you don't want it to be kind of natively yield bearing within a public vehicle like that. But what you could do is actually just sell dollars for like 90 cents on the dollar, and then sort of someone basically gets the pull to power in the same way that they do with a PT in one of these vehicles. And then it sort of like looks and feels a little bit like a bond ETF in some ways, just filled with kind of like quasi zero coupon bonds essentially. But yeah, I mean, PTs are at like 12 to 14% right now. I think the demand for that in a public vehicle would be pretty insane. Yeah.
I guess there are two parts. One is the public vehicle itself buying the USDE.
Yeah, sorry, just to be clear, it should be separate in my view, because I think people want clean stories. They don't want to buy into something which is kind of like doing some weird zero coupon stuff on the other side. I think you say if you want the equity and you want the exposure to this growth story here of the business, like this is what you're buying. And then I think it's a completely different product, I think, where you're offering people. Because
I thought these guys should kind of just set up an asset manager and then just market the hell out of it, and then run these SPVs that could scale up to $5-10 billion.
Like a subsidiary of the vehicle, basically.
Why not? Yeah.
Okay, I think that's pretty interesting. Yeah.
I don't know if you're aware of anybody doing that, or
not
it seems like they're pretty well placed.
Yeah.
What's that?
Yeah. Not in like a public security capacity, but I think that's a super interesting idea.
What else can it operate and own to earn free cash flow and juice the sort of ENA per share? Like, do you feel like they can run nodes on Converge? So what should we expect anything from that?
Yeah, so I think the fee switch discussion that we're talking about there, if and when that's sort of in place, it's obviously just a very direct, earning stream that comes through there that looks quite different to normal proof of stake networks, which is just like, token inflation on top rather than like actual earnings. And then I think we've had a pretty strong development of different apps building on Ethena and sort of launching their airdrops onto us. So we've had a few more come out in the last week with like Strata, Terminal, and a few other names. And so there's sort of income coming from other token projects that are building on our product alongside the potential fee stream that we described.
I guess you don't expect this listed vehicle today to do those kind of like heavy operation, right? You really just expect them to issue more shares and just buy ENA effectively.
I think that's right. Yeah, and to be frank, I think we've been so swamped. I think just getting this thing sort of stood up and ready. We haven't had like a broader discussion of what else, different pathways that we can take. But I think the idea that you had was definitely an interesting one worth exploring.
we had MicroStrategy for Bitcoin, and then we have like a bazillion kind of copycats or kind of similar stuff coming out. Should we expect any more of these Ethena vehicles coming to market, more than one? And if you can share at all, like, can you tell us on that front in terms of size and timing and numbers and so on and so forth?
Yeah, it's probably something I can't comment about publicly. Yeah.
Okay, makes sense. I need to try anyways. That's cool. And the last question on this box: when should we expect the buying public TWAP to start? Just so I have a sense.
It's been going on since day one, so I think the foundation account has tweeted once, and it's going to do it again this week, which is just like a periodic update of how much has been acquired. But yeah, it started on the day of the announcement and has been going on daily since then. Yeah. Got
it. Makes sense. Perfect. On to the Genius Act, and then maybe Clarity Act later. I guess the simplest questions I've read stuff, I've listened to stuff. They're not entirely clear to me. In the most simple terms, for like a noob like myself, like, what can you do now that you can't do before with the passage?
Yes, I think the simplest way to describe it is probably like opening up doors where someone is going to need this rubber stamp of approval to interact with your product. So I sort of think about it as like the absolute highest tier of financial institutions, like, proper global GSIBs, payment companies like PayPal, MasterCard, Visa. I don't think that they're going to be engaging with your product unless you do sort of elevate yourself to that standard. So I don't think anything changes like today to say like, it's Genius compliant. We think that there's going to be $5 billion that sort of flow through the door because of that. I think it's just if you are going to want to go and pursue some of those different directions that you could sort of take the product in terms of interacting with extremely regulated institutions, I think that they're just going to require that as like table stakes, essentially. Yeah.
I see. Interesting. And obviously, I think the Anchorage deal with you got planned for a while. You can only launch it after this Genius thing passed. Is that correct?
Yes, exactly. I think the unique thing about them is that they're basically the only OCC-regulated bank that's a crypto bank in America. And so it was just a very nice matchup of us doing a bunch together on distribution, because obviously having USDTV there and one of the largest custodians as, like an earned product and being available to their users was a pretty powerful, distribution platform for us. But then also being able to lean on, the regulatory work that they've done over the years to get to where they are, I thought was just a very good matchup versus where Ethena was sitting. Yeah.
And what would that mean to your numbers specifically over time?
I actually fundamentally don't think it changes things. I think if the Genius didn't exist, and I'll be honest with you on that front, if the Genius didn't exist, I don't think I could walk into the room and try and pitch the different areas that we're trying to take USDTB to. I think now it's just going to be a filtration process where if you haven't done that for plain vanilla stablecoins, they're just not going to open the door to even have the conversation. So it hasn't unlocked any new distribution or BD conversations right now, but it's also only been out for a week. So.
I think you were already talking to BlackRock before. I'm sure you have talked to Anchorage for a while. I guess a lot of the actors in the industry was also watching the Genius Act. Kind of, I don't know if they were waiting for it to be passed to talk, but I guess the better way to ask this question is if you can share, can you tell us some of the new conversations that you're having very recently that kind of really started ramping up after the act passed and you feel like could catapult your business?
Yeah, I think it's just a few inbounds from some of the types of businesses that I described when I said you need that to elevate yourself to that level. So I think it's like payment services businesses, like actual proper global banks. I think that those are kind of the areas that you can sort of pursue now that that's gone through. But the honest answer is that we haven't. There's been no material progress since Genius in terms of our ability to unlock anything in that sort of category since then. But yeah, I also think I had enough time to try it since then. Yeah. For what it's worth, I think some people are sort of over selling the impact of what Genius has to their products, if that makes sense. I don't think flipping a switch here means that you have $10 billion of demand for your product. I just think it's you need to now elevate yourself to the standard to just exist in some of these capacities for distribution. Yeah.
In a sense, it's pretty good too, because for a startup to get there, it probably takes some time, right? They need to be approved effectively.
Yeah.
Okay, makes sense. One more question until we move on to some newer stuff. But BaFin kind of messed with you, but you resolved it. And I think the conversation we had last time was that Binance and OKX are kind of just like, oh, let's wait until this happens. So now that BaFin happened, when Binance OKX, and I guess that's the only barrier between you and the fee switch.
Yeah, so I think there's the BaFin piece has come out. Well, the contents of that release was basically they revoked everything that they put out against us before, and there's a 6-week redemption program that was put in place. So if you go on the Ethena landing page now, you'll still see a pop-up that sits there, which basically says, if you're a German user, you can come in and redeem. It's been a slightly insane process because we've had to leave money sitting there for redemptions when we literally have not had a single dollar that sort of come to us and asked us to redeem. But the short story there is that like it's basically 2 weeks now until that full process has been like unwound. So you still need to sort of wait until the full redemption plan has sort of been seen through until the end.
Oh, interesting. 2 weeks from now. Okay.
They basically put out the notice on revoking it, but it's not fully unwound now, and that's why you still see a pop-up on the Ethena landing that's sitting there. Yeah.
Is there anything that is regulatorily speaking preventing Binance and OKX from really working with you?
I think it's reputational. Yeah, you just don't want to associate your brand with something that has an ongoing issue. Yeah, from our perspective, it's kind of done when they say revoked, but I think you kind of just want to have the whole thing sort of 100% closed out, just from a reputation perspective, I think. Yeah.
And one quick follow-up, like when and if the buyback is turned on, does it ever get turned off, or it kind of just like keeps running?
Yeah, I think this can be up to everyone sort of to decide for this. I think I'm going to put up a post when the time is right and we sort of hit the milestones that are sitting there in the public forum right now. I'm going to put up a post in terms of how I'm thinking about what the percentage is, the milestones, all these different pieces. So I think that's something I'm going to put in the public forum for people to discuss once we hit the milestones that are sitting there publicly right now. Yeah. Okay,
that makes sense. So we did talk about the sort of TVL for core USDE and USDP. I guess outside of that, where are you spending most of your time right now?
Yeah, so I think the Treasury stuff obviously just has a very large impact in terms of like the short-term impact on the overall business, and I think executing it now when the market has the amount of appetite that it does for Circle and these vehicles kind of elevates itself as to almost one of the top priorities right now outside of the product. I think the learning I've had in the last few months is that the market now is much more focused on revenue generation, unit economics, and real business models versus sort of like hand-wavy, we're going to go try X, Y, Z, and there's no real tangible connection in terms of how it actually drives your business forward. Given that, I think that a few of these exchange initiatives that we have, I think can really move the needle in terms of like different revenue lines that might come back to Ethena. There's nothing sort of confirmed on this side, but I think one thing that we're watching with a lot of interest is what's going on Hyperliquid at the moment with HIP-3. So for those that don't know, you have an ability now to bootstrap new markets with a different stablecoin pair or actually just new assets. So this could open up markets like trading equity perps, for example, maybe perps on RWAs. So that's like on the net new asset side. But it also allows someone like Ethena to basically rip up the entire sort of Hyperliquid engine right now and redenominate the entire thing into USDE. And the interesting thing of that is that, obviously for the product market fit that we found with USDE, flipping USDC on Bybit, and the use case that, putting together what I view as kind of the two killer use cases of crypto in one place, trading perps plus dollar worth of yield. We think that there's a pretty interesting opportunity here for another team to basically pick this up and actually try build something on top of HIP-3 with USDE redenomination. I think it's a pretty interesting like revenue opportunity because HIP-3 basically shares like 50% of the fees that come through from those markets with the deployer. And so if you run like basic maths, like even 25% of Hyperliquid flows at a 50% take, if people just want to use what we view as a superior form of collateral versus USDC, it's like north of 110, 120 mil of like cost-free revenue. So I think that's like an interesting development. There's no sort of like commitment on our side. We've had a few teams who are sort of like interested and sort of like pitching the idea. But I think that is like a potential avenue for us to look at. I think has pretty high upside relative to the investment that it would require. Yeah.
And you won't be building it yourself internally.
Yeah, there's not anything really to build. I think that's a cool thing of HIP-3, which is kind of like you slap a UI onto it, and everything in the back end is basically catered for you by Hyperliquid. So in theory, you could have 5 or 10 different teams running and doing the exact same thing. And it's obviously great for us.
And you would grant them Ethena tokens to incentivize them to basically be your I'm trying to think what's in it for them if they're accruing value basically to Ethena itself.
Yeah, you could think about it as like 50% is going to Hyperliquid, maybe 5 goes to someone who's picking up a front end and throwing it on, and then 45 goes to Ethena. I'm just making up numbers over here, but there's obviously some way to sort of apportion the economics in the same way that builder codes do. And yeah, we haven't, made a decision on this. There isn't like a team that we're saying like we're doing this with now. I'm more sort of just describing something that I think is an interesting idea to think through. And I think the position that Ethena has always taken is that it doesn't make sense for us to have an in-house exchange, because I think it sort of complicates a lot of different distribution channels and all those different pieces. But we've always been supportive of different teams building on our product and trying to drive it forward. So in the same way that Ethereal is building on USDE and trying to capture share on their side, this is just another way for us to be almost like a neutral party and sort of benefit from different exchanges building on our product, and have a bit of an index of different exchanges generating fees coming back to us. So I think it's a pretty potentially very interesting.
I see. So your point is like the value prop for integrating USDE as the underlying is so attractive, people should just do it.
It could be distribution, like when Ethena, and I don't mean this to come across in like sort of a arrogant way or whatever, but like when we put our brand onto something and sort of endorse it, like $1 billion will flow into it in a week, which is what happened with Ethereal. So I think people understand that when we put our weight behind it, we have one of the largest like LP active user bases in the whole of crypto. I think alongside Hyperliquid, it's obviously a very different user base in terms of like Hyperliquid has traders and we have active DeFi users. So I think that there is a very powerful impact that Ethena can bring when we sort of direct people towards one of these front ends and say we're like supportive of this going on, and can sort of help them bootstrap it. So yeah,
that's cool. How soon you think?
Jeff hasn't given any timelines on HIP-3, so it's sitting in testnet right now. As you know, their approach is pretty silent in terms of like delivery dates. But as I described, there is almost nothing to build. If someone builds a UI in 2 weeks, you could slap it onto HIP-3 when it's ready. So yeah.
Did you guys buy the HUSDE ticker?
We did, yeah. That's on our public wallet. Yeah.
Okay, good. Anything else you can do with Hyperliquid aside from the HIP-3?
Yeah, so I think people have noticed that we don't currently hedge on Hyperliquid right now, and there's very sort of particular reasons in terms of the way that they set up the margin and stuff like that, which makes it slightly less efficient. But I also think it has a slightly different risk profile to holding assets with a custodian facing a centralized exchange, which has like a cold and hot wallet infrastructure. So there is, I do think there is demand for a product that looks like USDE, which has pure exposure to just Hyperliquid, and that includes both the risk and the return. So like Hyperliquid funding rates in the last like 8-9 months kind of get you 250 to 300 basis points pickup versus the rest of the market, even when you adjust it for the capital inefficiency of not being able to run portfolio margin there. So I do believe that there would be demand for basically doing the same thing as we do with SUSD, but sort of isolating the risk and return in a separate token on Hyperliquid.
Oh, interesting.
And I think it can scale reasonably large now just because of how big Hyperliquid is, but then also being able to tokenize it and bringing it from Hyperliquid into the EVM and then integrating it in the same way that we have elsewhere, I think is a pretty interesting idea. Yeah.
And this will be a piece of the underlying of like USDTB, or like basically you can switch, the yield will come from 3 sources now. It'll be like centralized way that you always do, and then Treasury, and then also this. You kind of allocate accordingly. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think ideally you want to separate this into a different token just so people can express that preference, because we don't want to force people into that on USDE, which clearly is just working at the moment. So I think if we were going to look at doing something like this, I think it would be an isolated token, which is in USDE. Yeah.
And given that you bought at HUSDE, it sounds like you're pretty serious about this. And how soon should we expect, something to go live?
I don't have any timelines on that. Yeah.
Okay. What else really excites you? I mean, I feel like every time I talk to you, you come up with something else that juices your TVL by a factor of 2. So, anything else you can share with us?
I mean, there's a lot. There's a lot that we just went through. I think.
Okay, you just can't. Yeah. I know there's a lot, but what can you say publicly?
I think we covered off most of the things that are top of mind at the moment, and if I try to do one more thing, I'm a bit worried that we're going to lose a bit of focus.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Okay. All good. Team, folks, do you have anything else for Guy? I'll give you 3 seconds. Okay. This is short and sweet. Thank you. Thank you so much for coming on. Good episode.
Yeah.
Thanks
as always.
We'll have it out by tomorrow, hopefully.
Cool.
Thanks. Bye-bye.